There's a strange loneliness that comes not from being abandoned by others, but from abandoning versions of yourself. You wake up one morning and realize something has fundamentally shifted. The person you were 6 months ago, maybe even 6 weeks ago, feels like a stranger. Their dreams feel foreign to you now. Their fears seem almost small, irrelevant. Even their voice, the way they talk to themselves in the quiet moments, sounds like it belongs to someone you used to know, but can no longer fully remember. And here's what makes this so disorienting. Nobody prepared you for this particular kind of grief. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But what Jung didn't explicitly say in that famous quote is this: before you can accept yourself completely, you must first mourn the selves you've outgrown. And absolutely nobody tells you that grief is an integral part of growth. Before we dive deeper, if this resonates with your soul's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe for more transformational content. Your support helps this message reach other souls who need to hear it. Have you ever caught yourself mid-sentence talking about something that used to genuinely excite you and felt absolutely nothing, just emptiness where passion used to live? Or maybe you've scrolled through old photographs on your phone, and instead of nostalgia, you felt like you were looking at a costume you used to wear, a role you used to play, a character in a story that no longer belongs to you. Perhaps you've noticed that the people who truly understand you are changing. The conversations that once felt deep and meaningful now feel exhausting, even performative. The goals that used to drive you forward, that gave your days purpose and direction, now feel like obligations to a person who no longer exists. If you're experiencing any of this, I need you to hear something important. You're not broken. You're not depressed. You're not losing yourself or falling apart at the seams. You're experiencing something Carl Jung dedicated his entire life to: studying the natural death and rebirth of the psyche, the inevitable evolution of consciousness, the sacred process of becoming. For over a decade, I've immersed myself in the study of Carl Jung empath and personal development through the integrated lens of depth psychology, contemporary neuroscience, and spiritual transformation. I've witnessed thousands of individuals move through this exact phase, this liminal space between who they were and who they're becoming. And here's what the research, both ancient and modern, consistently shows us: the signs of outgrowing yourself are almost always mistaken for signs of falling apart. We pathologize what should be celebrated. We medicate what should be witnessed. We resist what should be honored. In the next 50 minutes, we're going to explore 5 unmistakable signs that you've entered what Jung called individuation, the soul's natural journey toward its most authentic form. These aren't surface-level personality changes we're talking about. These are tectonic shifts in your consciousness that mark genuine psychological and spiritual evolution. By the end of this journey together, you'll understand why disconnection from your old life is actually reconnection to your true self. You'll learn how inner chaos signals psychological integration rather than disintegration. You'll discover why peace feels disturbingly boring after years of emotional intensity. You'll gain tools to navigate this transition without pathologizing your own growth. And most importantly, you'll understand what comes next when you can no longer go back to who you were. This isn't just psychology. This is archaeology of the soul. This is the map to your own becoming. Let's begin. Before we identify the 5 signs, you need to understand something fundamental about how the human psyche actually evolves. Jung discovered through decades of clinical observation that consciousness doesn't grow in a neat, predictable straight line. It spirals. It circles back on itself. It descends before it ascends. It dissolves before it integrates. Think of it like this. Imagine your psyche as a vast mansion you've been living in your entire life. You know every room intimately, every corner, every creaking floorboard. You've decorated it exactly how you wanted. You've memorized where the light falls at different times of day. It feels comfortable. It feels safe. It feels like you. Then one day, completely unexpectedly, you notice a door you've never seen before. It's not hidden exactly, it's been there all along, but somehow you never registered its presence. Behind it, you find a staircase leading downward into darkness. And at the bottom, when you finally gather the courage to descend, you discover entire rooms you didn't know existed. Vast spaces that were always there, always part of your home, but hidden from your everyday awareness. This is the unconscious revealing itself. This is the psyche expanding beyond the boundaries you thought were fixed. When you outgrow your old self, what's really happening beneath the surface is this: the unconscious is demanding integration. The parts of yourself that you've kept in shadow, the dreams you systematically denied, the truths you carefully avoided, the authentic desires you buried under layers of social conditioning and survival mechanisms, they're no longer willing to stay hidden in the basement of your being. And modern neuroscience confirms Jung's intuition with remarkable precision. Your brain physically rewires itself during periods of significant psychological transformation. Neural pathways that once defined you, how you habitually respond to stress, what you find meaningful, even how you experience and process emotion. And these pathways begin to dissolve and reform. Old highways in your brain become dirt roads. New connections form where there were none before. This neurological process called neuroplasticity feels like instability because it literally is instability. But it's not pathological instability, not the kind that needs to be medicated away or feared. It's developmental instability. It's growth instability. Your nervous system is upgrading its operating system. Your consciousness is expanding its capacity. Your identity is being reconstructed at the most fundamental neurological level. The discomfort you feel isn't a sign that something's wrong with you. It's evidence that something's finally going right. But here's what makes this process even more profound. Jung understood something that modern psychology often conveniently ignores or strips away in its pursuit of clinical objectivity. He understood that psychological transformation is absolutely inseparable from spiritual awakening. When you outgrow your old self, you're not just changing your personality or updating your preferences or shifting your social circle. You're answering a call from what Jung called the self with a capital S, the divine center of your being, the image of God within you, the part of you that transcends the small ego and touches something infinite. Every major spiritual tradition throughout human history describes this exact process, just using different languages and metaphors. Christianity calls it metanoia, the transformation of consciousness, the renewal of the mind. Buddhism calls it awakening to your true nature, seeing through the illusion of the separate self. Sufism calls it the polishing of the heart until it becomes a perfect mirror of the divine. And Jung called it individuation, becoming the undivided self you were always meant to be. Same process, different vocabulary, different cultural frameworks, but the same essential journey from false self to true self, from ego to self, from sleep to awakening. What all these traditions agree on across centuries and continents and cultures is this: the person you think you are is not the person you truly are. The identity you've constructed, the story you tell about yourself, the mask you wear, it's not the fullness of your being. And at some point in your development, if you're paying attention, if you're willing to feel the discomfort the soul demands, that you stop pretending otherwise. Now here's what makes this process so genuinely painful, and why so many people abort the journey halfway through. The ego fights desperately to preserve itself. Your ego, your sense of I, your constructed identity has been built painstakingly over decades. Every achievement you've accumulated, every relationship you've formed, every belief about yourself you've developed has reinforced a particular identity. A particular story about who you are and what you're worth and what you're capable of. When that story starts to crack, when the foundations begin to shift, the ego experiences it as death. And in a very real psychological sense, it is death. Not literal physical death, but the death of a psychological structure that has kept you safe, that has helped you navigate the world, that has given you a sense of stability and continuity. Jung wrote with brutal honesty, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. This is why people sabotage their own growth at the very threshold of transformation. Why they suddenly create drama to feel alive again, to return to the familiar intensity of conflict. Why they cling desperately to relationships that no longer serve them, that actively harm them just because those relationships are known. Why they numb themselves compulsively with work, with substances, with endless digital distraction, with anything that keeps them from feeling what needs to be felt. The ego would genuinely rather suffer in familiar ways than transform into unknown wholeness. And here's what makes this even more complex. The ego is extraordinarily clever. It will disguise itself as growth. You might find yourself jumping from one healing modality to another, one teacher to another, one system to another. Not because you're genuinely integrating, but because the constant seeking allows you to avoid the actual work of sitting still with yourself. The ego loves spiritual materialism, collecting insights like trophies, without letting them fundamentally change you. It loves the identity of being on a spiritual journey more than actually taking the journey. But if you're here reading these words, watching this something in, you has already chosen transformation. The soul has already begun its quiet, insistent work. The call has been heard, even if you're not yet sure how to answer it. Now let's recognize the signs. These aren't arbitrary symptoms plucked from thin air or based on casual observation. These are universal markers of psychic reorganization that appear consistently across cultures, across historical eras, across individual experiences. They're as reliable and predictable as developmental stages in childhood, except these are stages of consciousness maturing into its fullest form, the soul growing into its intended shape. Sign 1. The Great Withdrawal. You wake up one ordinary Tuesday morning and realize with startling clarity, the career you spent years meticulously building, the success you sacrificed for it, feels strangely hollow now. The social life you once loved and actively maintained feels increasingly performative, like you're an actor who's forgotten why they're on stage. The goals that used to drive you forward with such urgency now feel, and this is the word that keeps coming up, small. Not sad, not angry, not even particularly disappointing. Just empty, meaningless, flat. Maybe you're a lawyer who suddenly can't remember why you cared about making partner, or a parent who goes through the motions of family routines without feeling the warmth that used to be there. Perhaps you're someone who built an entire identity around fitness or achievement, and now the gym feels like a chore. The competitions feel pointless. The activities haven't changed. You have. You might think you're depressed, and you might even seek treatment for depression. But Jung would diagnose something entirely different. He would say your libido is withdrawing. Now, libido in Jung's framework isn't sexual energy, despite how Freud used the term. It's psychic energy. It's the force that animates you, that gives things significance, that makes life feel alive and worth living. It's what you invest in the world to create meaning. When you outgrow a particular phase of life, when you've extracted all the lessons and growth that phase had to offer, the self, your deeper consciousness, your wiser self, actively recalls libido from external investments and redirects it inward toward the depths. This is what Jung called the withdrawal of projections. For years, perhaps for decades, you projected your sense of meaning and purpose onto external things, achievements, status, relationships, roles, identities. Those things felt genuinely important, genuinely significant, because you were constantly pouring your precious psychic energy into them. They mattered because you made them matter through your investment. Now the psyche is saying something different. That energy is urgently needed elsewhere. we have deeper work to do. We're going down. When major identity shifts occur, neuroscience shows us that the brain's default mode network, the neural network responsible for self-referential thinking for your sense of continuous identity, begins to dramatically reorganize itself. Areas associated with your old identity, particularly the anterior cingulate cortex and the medial prefrontal cortex, show measurably decreased activation. Meanwhile, areas associated with present moment awareness and integration, like the insula and posterior cingulate, become significantly more active. Your brain is literally physically rewiring its fundamental sense of self. The neural patterns that once defined you, that once constituted your identity at the most basic level, are dissolving. And beneath that dissolution, a more integrated, more authentic structure is slowly forming. This feels profoundly disorienting because the familiar architecture of your mind is changing. It's like living in a house while the foundation is being rebuilt. You're still there, still functioning, but everything feels unstable, uncertain. You might notice yourself forgetting things that used to be important, missing appointments that the old you would never miss, losing interest mid-conversation, staring at your to-do list and feeling nothing. This isn't laziness or depression, it's your psyche redirecting resources to more essential work happening beneath conscious awareness. But please understand, the emptiness you're experiencing isn't absence, it's spaciousness. The psyche is creating room, clearing out the clutter, so something more authentic, more true can emerge. Think of it like this. A tree must let go of all its leaves in autumn to survive the winter and bloom again in spring. That falling away, that apparent dying, isn't death at all, it's preparation for deeper, more resilient life. In Christian mysticism, this phase is called the dark night of the senses, when God systematically withdraws consolation from external things, specifically to draw the soul deeper into direct divine union, into unmediated relationship with the sacred. In Buddhism, it's recognizing the fundamental emptiness of all conditioned phenomena, not nihilistic emptiness that leads to despair, but the spaciousness where true freedom actually lives, where you're no longer trapped by attachment. You're not losing meaning. You're being invited into a deeper, more stable source of it. Sign 2. The persona cracks. You're at dinner with friends you've known for years. They're laughing at familiar jokes, telling the same stories they always tell, playing out the same comfortable group dynamics. You used to be right there with them, the funny one, the wise one, the supportive one, whatever role you naturally occupied. But now, you feel like you're watching yourself from somewhere outside your body, going through the motions mechanically, saying the expected lines, playing the part. But something fundamental has shifted inside you, and you can't pretend otherwise. The mask doesn't fit anymore, and you can feel it slipping. Jung called this the persona, the social mask we wear to function effectively in the world, to meet social expectations, to belong. The persona isn't inherently fake or bad. It's actually necessary for survival. We need personas to work to relate to others, to navigate complex social environments. The problem isn't having a persona. The problem is mistaking the persona for the self, believing that the role you play is genuinely who you are at the deepest level. When you start outgrowing your old self, the persona begins to crack. Not because you're becoming antisocial or damaged, but because your authentic self is demanding expression. The truth of who you are can no longer be contained in the costume you've been wearing. You can no longer pretend convincingly. You can no longer perform with the same ease. You can no longer sacrifice your fundamental truth for social harmony or approval. This creates profound, sometimes unbearable discomfort for 3 interconnected reasons. First, other people genuinely liked the persona you wore. It made them comfortable. It allowed them to relate to you in predictable ways. Your mask fit neatly into their expectations. Second, you built your entire life around that persona, your career, your relationships, your daily routines, your sense of identity. dismantling it feels like dismantling everything. Third, letting it go feels like free falling without a parachute. If you're not the role you've been playing, then who are you? Research in developmental psychology consistently shows that identity reformation peaks during 3 distinct life phases: adolescence, when we're breaking from our childhood self; midlife, when we're confronting mortality and meaning; and late life, when we're integrating shadow and contemplating legacy. But trauma, sudden awakening, or major life disruption can trigger this process at absolutely any age. The soul doesn't follow a schedule. When the persona cracks, you're experiencing what psychologists call role strain, and the exhaustion of maintaining an identity that no longer authentically reflects your inner reality. It's like wearing shoes that are 3 sizes too small. You can still walk, but every step hurts. You might find yourself saying things like, "I should want this," instead of, "I want this." Or catching yourself performing enthusiasm you don't genuinely feel. Maybe you're the person who always says yes, and suddenly you're saying no without explanation. Perhaps you're the strong one everyone depends on, and you're discovering you need support too. The mask is cracking, because what's underneath is demanding space to breathe. This is genuinely one of the loneliest phases of transformation, because the people around you often cannot see what you're experiencing internally. They see you pulling away, becoming different, acting strange. They might accuse you of being distant, selfish, going through some kind of phase or crisis. But what's really happening? You're being born again. And birth is never comfortable, not for the one being born, and not for those who must adjust to the arrival of new life. Jesus said it perfectly. New wine cannot be put in old wineskins, or the skins will burst. Your old persona, the wineskin, simply cannot contain the expanded consciousness, the new wine that's fermenting within you. The cracking isn't destruction, it's liberation. If you're in this phase right now, let me offer you some practical wisdom. Stop trying desperately to force the old persona back on. It won't work, and the effort will exhaust you. Communicate honestly with the people close to you about what you're experiencing. Those who truly love you will adjust. Give yourself permission to not know who you're becoming yet. The not knowing is part of the process. And please trust that authenticity is ultimately more valuable than acceptance. The self knows who you are. The persona was only ever an approximation, a rough draft. Sign 3. Inner chaos intensifies. Dreams become vivid, strange, sometimes terrifying. Old memories surface without warning or apparent reason. You might suddenly remember something from childhood you haven't thought about in decades. A smell triggers an emotional flashback. A song makes you cry for reasons you can't articulate. You feel pulled in completely opposite directions, craving solitude and connection, simultaneously needing structure and freedom, wanting clarity and mystery. One day you're certain about your path, the next day you question everything. Anxiety spikes unexpectedly. Depression visits uninvited. Anger emerges seemingly out of nowhere, directed at nothing specific. You might snap at people you love, then feel confused about why you reacted so strongly. You think, I was doing so well. I was making real progress. Why is this happening now? This is what Jung called enantiodromia, his term for the psychological principle that everything eventually transforms into its opposite when pushed too far in one direction. When consciousness becomes too one-sided, too controlled, too rational, too good, too light, the unconscious automatically compensates by flooding awareness with the opposite energy. It's a self-regulating mechanism, the psyche's way of maintaining balance. That chaos you're feeling, it's not regression into old patterns. It's not evidence that you're backsliding or failing. It's the unconscious systematically correcting your imbalance. all the parts of yourself you've worked so hard to deny, to suppress, to exile into the basement of your being. They're rising to the surface now, demanding recognition, demanding integration. Jung called this shadow integration the difficult but absolutely necessary process of acknowledging and incorporating the disowned parts of yourself. The parts you've labeled as bad, weak, unacceptable, shameful. During psychological transformation, neuroscience shows us that the brain's limbic system, your emotional center, becomes significantly hyperactive, while the prefrontal cortex, your rational control center, shows temporarily decreased regulatory capacity. This creates what neuroscientists call cognitive emotional dysregulation, the subjective experience of feeling things intensely without having your usual level of control over those feelings. But here's what's crucial to understand: this isn't pathology requiring medication. It's reorganization. It's necessary chaos that precedes new order. Your brain is actively processing and integrating emotional material that's been stored in implicit memory for years, sometimes for decades. Experiences you never fully processed. Feelings you never fully felt. Truths you never fully acknowledged. If you're in this chaos right now, drowning in it, please hear this. You're not breaking down. You're breaking through. Every emotion that surfaces, no matter how uncomfortable, is actually an invitation. Anger says, a boundary was violated and needs to be established. Sadness says, something important needs to be grieved and released. Fear says, you're approaching something that genuinely matters to you. Shame says, an old story about your worth needs radical revision. Jung wrote with profound insight, in all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order. The chaos isn't random. It's not arbitrary. It's not punishment. It's the psyche's wise way of reorganizing itself around a deeper, truer center. Christian mystics called this the dark night of the soul, a period where God seems utterly absent, where faith feels impossible, where nothing makes sense and prayer feels like talking to empty air. But as John of the Cross wrote beautifully, the dark night is not darkness at all. It's the blinding light of divine transformation that the ego experiences as darkness because it cannot comprehend, it cannot control it, cannot contain it. During this phase, let me offer some practical guidance. Journal your dreams religiously. They're speaking directly from the unconscious in the language of symbols. Create consistent space for emotional expression through therapy, art, movement, or solitude. Stop pathologizing. Your experience, chaos, is an integral part of the process, not evidence of failure. And please trust that your psyche is fundamentally wise and knows exactly what it's doing. The confusion you feel, the disorientation, the emotional turbulence, it's the old order dissolving, so a new, more integrated order can emerge from the depths. Sign 4. Depth replaces drama. You lose tolerance sometimes, quite suddenly, for small talk that goes absolutely nowhere. For relationships based primarily on transaction rather than genuine truth. For entertainment that merely distracts without nourishing. For goals that serve only ego gratification. For conversations that systematically avoid real feeling. Maybe you find yourself leaving parties early, not out of social anxiety, but because the energy feels draining rather than enlivening. Perhaps you're deleting apps that used to consume hours of your attention. You might be declining invitations that the old you would have accepted without question. People might ask, "Are you okay? You're being so serious lately." And you struggle to explain that you're not being serious. You're simply being real for perhaps the first time. And simultaneously, you find yourself craving silence that speaks. Books that challenge your fundamental assumptions, conversations that actually transform you. Solitude that restores rather than depletes. Meaning that transcends personal benefit. This is the shift from persona consciousness, living from the outside and organized around external validation, to self-consciousness, living from the inside out, organized around internal truth. For years, perhaps, your entire adult life, you may have unconsciously organized your existence around external validation. What looks good to others, what people expect from you, what society rewards and recognizes. Now the self is saying clearly, that's not enough anymore. That will never be enough. Jung called this the movement from the first half of life, building ego, achieving, externally accumulating, to the second half of life, finding genuine meaning, integrating shadow, serving something infinitely larger than yourself. Not everyone makes this transition. Many people spend their entire lives at the surface, never diving into the depths where the real treasure lives, where the real work happens. If you're experiencing this shift, this growing hunger for depth, congratulations, your soul is maturing into its full capacity. Research on meaning-making and psychological development shows that as people move steadily towards psychological wholeness, their brain's reward system, the dopamine pathways that once lit up for external validation, becomes measurably less responsive to those external rewards. What used to give you a genuine hit, likes on social media, praise from authority figures, achievements and awards, no longer activates the same neural satisfaction, the same sense of fulfillment. Instead, experiences of authenticity, depth, and connection to something transcendent begin to activate parasympathetic nervous system responses associated with genuine contentment and lasting peace. Your brain is literally rewiring itself to find fulfillment in depth, rather than distraction, in substance, rather than surface. This shift can be profoundly socially isolating because most of the world still operates primarily at the surface level. Most people are still playing the game you've stopped playing. You might lose friends who can't or won't go deeper. You might feel increasingly alienated from your own culture, from mainstream values. You might wonder if something's wrong with you for not being able to just enjoy life the simple way you used to. But here's the fundamental truth. Once you've genuinely tasted depth, you cannot go back to shallowness without betraying yourself at the deepest level. Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." You've stopped avoiding. And that changes absolutely everything about how you experience reality. In contemplative spiritual traditions, this is called conversion of the heart, the moment when worldly satisfaction definitively no longer satisfies and only divine union, only direct encounter with the sacred will do. Teresa of Avila wrote from experience, "The soul that has tasted God cannot find rest in anything less than God." If you're in this phase, honor your need for depth. It's not elitism or superiority, it's evolution. Actively seek out people who live from their depths. They exist, and they're looking for you too. Create genuinely sacred space in your life for silence and deep reflection. And let go with compassion of relationships that demand you stay shallow to stay connected. The loneliness you feel now is temporary. The community of depth seekers is waiting for you to find them. Sign 5, peace replaces passion. After months or years of intensity, healing, seeking, transforming, working on yourself, something fundamentally shifts. The emotional roller coaster levels out. The constant need to actively work on yourself gradually fades. The urgency to figure everything out, to understand everything, simply dissolves like morning mist. And in its place, a calm that almost feels boring. A peace that feels suspiciously like nothing. You might wake up and realize you haven't journaled in weeks, and you don't feel guilty about it. Therapy sessions become less frequent because there's less crisis to process. The self-help books sitting on your nightstand go unread, not because you're avoiding growth, but because you're finally living it. You think, wait, is this it? Is this what I was working toward all this time? This strange ordinariness. There's almost a sense of anticlimax, like arriving at the mountaintop, only to find it looks remarkably like the valley below. This is the arrival Jung spent his entire life pointing toward, the integration of opposites. For years you lived in exhausting duality. Good versus bad. Light versus shadow. Success versus failure. Love versus fear. Right versus wrong. The ego thrives on these sharp oppositions because they create drama, conflict, intensity. And drama gives the ego a powerful sense of significance, of being alive, of mattering. But the self, your deeper consciousness, doesn't work in dualities. It holds paradox effortlessly. It contains opposites without conflict. When you've genuinely outgrown your old self, you no longer need drama to feel alive. You can hold both joy and sorrow simultaneously, both strength and vulnerability, both knowing and not knowing, both certainty and mystery. Jung called this the conjunctio, on the sacred marriage, the mystical union of opposites within the psyche. Brain scans of individuals who've achieved significant psychological integration show markedly increased prefrontal limbic connectivity, the rational and emotional centers working in genuine harmony rather than perpetual conflict. They also show decreased activity in the amygdala, your fear center, and increased activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is associated with compassion and perspective taking. What this means, practically, you experience emotions fully without being completely hijacked by them. You feel anger without becoming rage. You feel sadness without becoming despair. You feel joy without becoming manic. You feel fear without becoming paralyzed. This isn't numbness or dissociation. It's balance. It's integration. It's wholeness. This phase is genuinely confusing because our entire culture glorifies intensity. We're taught from childhood that passion equals aliveness, that calm equals complacency or resignation, that peace means you've given up. So when you arrive at genuine peace, part of you panics. Did I lose my edge? Did I become boring? Did I settle for mediocrity? No, you became whole. The passion you once desperately needed to feel alive was actually compensation for inner fragmentation. You needed intensity drama, extreme emotion to feel real because you weren't in authentic touch with your true self. Now that you are. Aliveness doesn't require volume. Presence doesn't require performance. Jung wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." You're not less than you were. You're finally, for perhaps the first time, complete. In Buddhism, this is called equanimity, not cold indifference, but the capacity to remain centered regardless of external conditions. In Christianity, it's the peace that passes understanding, the deep calm that exists beneath all circumstances, untouched by surface chaos. In Taoism, it's wu-wei effortless action that flows naturally from alignment with the Tao, with the way of things. If you've arrived at this peace, resist the temptation to create drama just to feel alive again. Trust that this calm is healing, not apathy or depression. Know that you can still feel deeply without losing yourself in feeling. And recognize that this is genuine maturity, not resignation or defeat. The soul has finally stopped fighting itself. You're no longer who you were, but you're not fully who you're becoming. This liminal space, this threshold between identities, is where most people get stuck. They panic. They regress. They try desperately to resurrect the old self or force the new self to arrive before it's organically ready. Jung called this the tension of opposites, and he believed this uncomfortable tension is precisely where transformation actually happens, where the real work occurs. The work of Carl Jung, empath and personal development, teaches us that discomfort during transformation isn't only normal, it's absolutely necessary. Modern psychology often tries to eliminate all discomfort to smooth over every rough edge. But Jung understood profoundly, some discomforts are sacred. They're the birth pangs of your authentic self. Stop pathologizing your growth. Every symptom we've discussed, withdrawal, persona, cracking inner chaos, depth, seeking peace, these aren't signs of mental illness. They're signs of psychological and spiritual maturation unfolding exactly as it should. You need to mourn who you used to be. Even if that person was limiting, even if that life was small and constricted, it was yours. You built it with your own hands. You lived it. You identified with it. Letting it go is genuinely a kind of death, and all deaths deserve to be grieved, properly honored fully. This might look like writing a letter to your former self, thanking them for getting you this far. It might mean looking at old photos, not with judgment, but with compassion. Perhaps it involves rituals of release, burning journals, donating clothes that represented the old identity, saying goodbye to spaces that held the old you. Give yourself permission to feel sadness for the person you were. Honor what that version of you accomplished against often difficult odds. Acknowledge what you're leaving behind, relationships, ambitions, identities that no longer fit. Say goodbye with respect and gratitude. This isn't weakness. This is honoring the journey. Trust the wisdom of the psyche. Your unconscious knows what it's doing. Jung spent decades carefully observing the psyche's self-regulating capacity, its natural intelligence. He witnessed repeatedly that when left to its natural process, without excessive interference from ego control or societal pressure, the psyche moves inevitably toward wholeness. The dreams you're having, their guidance from the depths, the emotions you're feeling, their information, not problems to solve. The chaos you're experiencing, it's reorganization, not disintegration. Your psyche is actively trying to heal you. Stop fighting it with every ounce of your strength. The work isn't to control this process. The work is to stay conscious during it. Stay curious about what's unfolding. Stay compassionate toward yourself. Stay open to what wants to emerge from the darkness. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Trust that your deeper self knows who that is. Living from the integrated self looks like authentic relationships where you attract people who genuinely see your depth and match it. The superficial connections naturally fall away, but what remains is real, solid, nourishing. You have fewer friends, but deeper friendships. Less networking, more genuine connection. It looks like meaningful work where you stop chasing what looks impressive and start pursuing what feels aligned with your deepest values. Even if it's less glamorous, it satisfies in a way achievement never could. You might make less money, but feel wealthier. You might have less status, but more peace. It looks like inner authority where you stop looking desperately outside yourself for permission, validation, or direction. You consult your inner knowing first. When someone asks, "What do you think you should do?" you actually have an answer that comes from your depths, not from what you think they want to hear. It looks like paradox tolerance, where you can hold opposing truths simultaneously without needing to resolve the tension. You're both strong and vulnerable, both independent and connected, both knowing and humble. You can be certain about your values while remaining curious about new perspectives. It looks like presence, where you're less haunted by past regrets, less anxious about future possibilities. You can actually be here now, without needing to escape or improve the moment. It looks like compassion, where having integrated your shadow, you judge others less harshly. You recognize their struggle as your own struggle. You meet people where they actually are without needing them to be different. It looks like service, where your life becomes less about getting approval, achievement, security, and more about giving wisdom, love, presence. This doesn't mean you become perfect. It means you become real. And that realness, that integrated authenticity, is what the world desperately needs from you. There's a Zen saying that captures this perfectly. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The tasks are identical. The circumstances are the same. but the one doing them has been fundamentally transformed. When you outgrow your old self and integrate into wholeness, you return to ordinary life. But you're not the same person who left. You chop wood differently now with presence instead of resentment. You carry water differently with purpose instead of obligation. You haven't transcended the world or floated away into spiritual bypass. You've learned to be fully in it, fully human, fully alive. Jung understood something profound that modern psychology often misses: the self. The integrated whole consciousness is the image of God within you. The imago Dei, not God as external authority figure, but God as your deepest truth, your most authentic nature, the divine spark that was always there, always present patiently, waiting to be recognized. When you outgrow your constructed false self and step courageously into your true self, you're not becoming someone new. You're becoming who you were before the world told you who to be. Before you learned to perform, before you learned to hide, before you learned to shrink to fit other people's comfort zones. You're recovering the child who knew how to play without purpose, the teenager who felt things deeply before learning to numb, the young adult who dreamed before reality taught them to settle. You're integrating all these selves into one coherent whole. This is what the spiritual traditions call returning to original nature, not regression to childhood, but restoration of your fundamental essence. The Taoists call it returning to the uncarved block. Christians call it becoming like a child to enter the kingdom. Buddhists call it recognizing your original face before you were born. If you've recognized yourself in these 5 signs, hear this clearly. You're not broken. You're not lost in some pathological way. You're not falling behind while everyone else moves forward. You're shedding a skin that no longer fits so you can breathe fully for perhaps the first time in your life. This process, this sacred discomfort, is the path of Carl Jung, empath, and personal development at its deepest, most transformational level. It's the journey every awakening soul must eventually take. And while the specific details differ for each person, the fundamental arc remains the same: from unconscious to conscious, from fragmented to whole, from false self to true self. Here's what you can do right now, today, to honor this process. First, stop fighting what's happening. The resistance creates more suffering than the transformation itself. What you resist persists. What you accept transforms. Second, find witnesses for your journey. This doesn't mean everyone needs to understand, most won't. But find one person, a therapist, a trusted friend, someone who can hold space for your becoming without trying to fix you or pull you back to who you were. Third, create rituals of transition. Your psyche speaks in symbols. Mark this passage with something meaningful, a journal dedicated to this phase, a physical object that represents your commitment to truth, a practice that grounds you when everything feels uncertain. Fourth, trust the timing. You can't force this process any more than you can force a seed to grow faster. Your only job is to provide the right conditions: honesty, space, patience, compassion, and let nature do what nature does. And you don't have to walk it alone. The work of outgrowing yourself is initially lonely, yes. But on the other side of that loneliness is a community of people who have made this same journey. They're waiting for you to find them. You haven't lost yourself. You've outgrown the version of you that was never the whole truth. The person you're becoming has always been there beneath the masks, beyond the roles, patiently waiting for you to remember. This is individuation. This is awakening. This is coming home to the self. And it's not the end of your story. It's finally, beautifully, the beginning. Jung wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakes? You're awake now. Welcome to your new life. If this resonated with you, if you saw yourself clearly in these 5 signs, leave a comment below. Tell us which sign hit you the hardest. Share your own experience of outgrowing yourself. The path of transformation can feel profoundly isolating, but you're not alone in this. This community exists to witness your journey. And if you're hungry for more depth, subscribe to this channel. We're building something rare here, a space where psychology, spirituality, and radical self-honesty meet. Welcome home.